Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone so much for coming along today. I know obviously on a Friday afternoon everyone's trying to catch up with things and clear their desks before the weekend, but hopefully this will help kind of clear your mind and get you invigorated and excited for your weekend. So we are joined today by the lovely Celine. She's an expert in the field of well-being, so she's going to take us through a number of different approaches, and we're going to have a look at sort of more than one aspect of well-being and wellness. Sort of tends to be kind of over the holistic side. Is that correct, Celine? But yeah, so she's going to take us through lots of things today. I've heard wonderful things about these sessions, so hopefully you will enjoy it. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and hello to everybody that's here. I know that there could be many other places that you could be, and you've probably got more than just this Zoom screen open on your computer, and you've got your phone at hand, maybe even 2 phones. However, can I give you the permission to give yourself the presence of being present? We will definitely finish on time. I've got a lot prepared, and what I know is that when we're present, we're able to take more. We're also able to really fully align, not just our minds, but our hearts as well. And that helps us to become more aware and to take something back from today so that you can feel more equipped to better manage your energy and your performance and your overall well-being. Because I know that many of you are well-informed around well-being. I am myself. I'm often referred to as this expert, but actually the more I do this work, the more I realize the less I know, and how unique we all are, and how collectively we need to help one another, especially when we consider the times that we've been through. So this really is an opportunity for you, perhaps as generally in the carer type role or support role, to really take reflection time and go inward. And although we're going to cover quite a bit of ground, I'm going to ask you to just make one personal pledge to yourself at the end before we say goodbye. And today's not the last time we're going to see each other. There is an opportunity for us to do a celebration and a check-in in about a month's time, which is quite exciting because that helps for accountability and inspiration and motivation. But I'm going to ask you to just leave with one thing so that you don't feel as if you've got a whole lot of things to do. Because if all of this was easy, if well-being was as simple as it seems, many more of us would be happier and healthier. And it isn't. It may be common sense, but common sense or common knowledge is not common practice. So a lot of what I speak about is around looking at our lifestyles and how we can realistically create new behaviors or tweak current behaviors that can better serve us and make it easy without adding more stress. So I'm going to, perhaps Kirsty, you can give me a thumbs up if you can see my slide in a moment so that you don't just need to watch me. There we go. Spotify seems to have taken over my presentation. There we go. Okay. Notice actually in this moment as you're waiting, because if we're used to things working quickly as we normally get, whether your breathing perhaps shifted. I'm going to be speaking about the power of the breath in a moment. So I invite you to take a deep breath in, maybe a little bit deeper than you were a few moments ago. And as you exhale, to give yourself permission to actually arrive and be present here at the screen. Kirsty, thumbs up if you can see a slide that says performance chemistry. Excellent. Zoom is having a good Friday too, because you just never know with tech. And as you can see in that logo, it's not just about understanding a bit more about chemistry and how they can better support performance. It's also quite unique. So we all have a unique fingerprint. We also have a unique blueprint when it comes to our well-being. And I'm going to share some general principles that work for most of us, but also help you to really know how you can fine-tune your approach and optimize your well-being. Because when we optimize our well-being, when we have lots of energy and we feel that we can perform well, then we feel like we can move mountains. It's when we have no energy or we're not feeling well, or perhaps when we give up our health while building wealth, that everything may feel like it's a mountain. So one of the aims that I have for today is to help each of us leave with one strategy that we can put into place to help us each own the title CEO And for me, CEO stands for Chief Energy Officer, or perhaps Chief Effervescent Officer, because I sound South African because I was born in South Africa, but everybody in my family comes from the Champagne region in France. And so I have this love for what Champagne symbolizes, which is more than just celebration and community. It's especially about effervescence. And today we need effervescence more than ever. And when we have lots of effervescence, we not only feel uplifted and as if anything's possible, we feel lighter despite what might be happening around us, but we're also able to maybe have some of that energy overflow and help others. So I've come prepared, but I want this to also be not just a monologue, me talking at you. So please feel free to engage with me. I've got my eye on the chat. I'd like us to feel like we are actually sitting around in the same room together. This is really difficult. You know, we're trying to make eye contact, but we're just not. We never get it right when we're doing these kind of calls. And so there's no mirror neurons going on. So your mind right now and my mind are trying extra hard to focus, and that takes lots of energy. And that's why I specifically say, because we're talking about well-being, try not to be distracted if you're able to. You may have a dozen things still to get through on your to-do list, but if you leave with one thing that can help you work more effectively, feel more efficient, better manage your strategic rest and how you approach your well-being, I guarantee that you'll be able to get more work done in the weeks to come in less time. So this time investment can give you really good ROI. And everything is an invitation. I've got theory, but I've also got practical, because well-being is not just about a book that you read, you know? It's a bit, I guess, like driving a car. You need to actually do it to get good at it. What I also like about driving a car is as I start getting out there and going back to being with clients in person, I've done 4 road trips already this year. And I've noticed how you can never quite predict what's going to happen on the roads, diversions and blockages and traffics, and somebody might pull in front of you and not drive really smartly. And you can, you know, clench your jaw, grab the steering wheel, frown, you know, let your inner critic come up and say, oh, you should have left even earlier than you did. And why are people driving so irresponsibly? Or you can relax the grip on the steering wheel, loosen your jaw, allow your shoulders to drop to the ground, purposefully slow down your breathing and save some energy. Stay calm despite the chaos around you, because there's a lot we can't control. And it's more than just that's what's happening on the roads, right? The one thing we all have a lot more control over than we often give ourselves credit for is the ability to manage our inner state of calm, which can save us loads of energy, mentally, emotionally, physically. And it can help us really come through these difficult times like we have with COVID. I can't even use the term come through. We haven't had a final ending. Things are still very uncertain, and that's draining. That uncertainty gnaws at us. And many of us have got our own stories around loss and grief and despair and sadness. And we shouldn't just ignore those, you know? So this is an opportunity to also reflect on how when we go through difficult times, those seasons of winter, or as the author Thomas Moore calls it, dark nights of the soul, when we look back, we can potentially find how we grew and grit and resilience that we wouldn't have found if we didn't go through that. However, when you're in a winter, in a dark time, when you're in that chaos, it can be difficult. And especially at the moment, I am seeing so much, I want to say burnout, but I use the word burnout very carefully because some of us use it flippantly, you know, like, oh, I'm working so hard, I'm so burnt out. But really, as a clinician myself, I've seen the extreme end of burnout where somebody has just about organ system failure, you know, and they're absolutely unable to function. But it's a spectrum. And so today is also about taking a moment to reflect on yourself, to notice if maybe there are things coming up that if you don't pay attention to, you could potentially experience shifts in your mood, mental health conditions, perhaps even get to burnout. I've had that. This time last year, January 2021, I was not having my finest hour. I had a lot of emotional and physical symptoms like night sweats and headaches and digestive issues that I'd never had before. I thought I'd landed in the middle of menopause. Turns out it might have been a bit of seasonal affective disorder, and I had some nutrient deficiencies. And once I got some things back in balance, my whole world lightened up. So I also want to say that it's okay not to be feeling okay. And if we stay curious, that can help. Also compassionate, because we've been through a lot and continue to go through a lot. And it's all right to not always be feeling on top of the world. And I know that many of you have come across and worked with some of the work from Brené Brown. And what's really important is to maybe work on our emotional literacy. So be able to identify how we're feeling in the moment and to be able to tap into that authenticity that she speaks about, the vulnerability of being able to speak how we feel, and also be compassionate with others, because we've been through phenomenal stress, right? And I'm not going to go into the deep biology of it, but I find this so useful before we go into some practical solutions to understand why we're having this conversation. Because if we know that hydration and sleep and eating vegetables are good for us, why is it that we're not always doing them? And also the need becomes so much more when you understand how much stress we've had. So as a young child, my parents being French, they went to South Africa on honeymoon and ended up staying there. So they've been there for 53 years. They're still there. And we used to go to safari game drives a lot, once or twice a year, every year while I was growing up. So I have had many instances where we have actually been attacked or chased by animals, because my father, especially the elephants, he would get a bit too close to them to take photographs. And I remember what that felt like, you know, that flood of hormones when your hypothalamus in your brain perceives the stress all coming towards you, which then immediately within microseconds tells your adrenals, little almond or walnut shaped glands on the top of your kidneys. They're really small, but boy, have they worked a lot, especially over the past 18 months, almost 2 years now, to release adrenaline and cortisol to help you prepare to be in this fight or flight mode. And that is exhausting. You know, a little bit of that adrenaline and cortisol release is all right. But when it's ongoing, like it has been, and where most of us have had our whole worlds turned upside down, where we're not just working from home, we're working with home or feeling like we're living at work, and all the pressures that come with all the change, is that we're in this perpetual state of stress. And we may not be chased by wild animals, but we're chased potentially by teams not working, double meetings, things running late, imaginary stress, emotional stress from loved ones, all kinds of things. And when we're constantly in the stress response and the nervous system moves more towards what we call the sympathetic nervous system. So I know that a lot of you will understand this. We're in this hyper aroused state, which helps us stay alert and focused, which is good. If you were going to run it off and actually get rid of all the cortisol, or if you were going to attack the animal. But we aren't doing that. We're sitting behind screens, or potentially we're in cars or with clients, and we have back to back every hour, we're having this flood of hormones. So we're constantly in this acceleration mode. And so we end up feeling tired, exhausted, but very wired. And we're not spending enough time helping the nervous system relax, put the brakes on, go into what we call rest and digest and healing. And so a lot of the techniques that I'm going to share with you, the underlying why, you know, if we think of Simon Sinek and starting with why, is to help our nervous systems get some rest and respite so that we can not only bounce back and stay resilient, but we can feel like we can actually bounce forward. And one way to do that, because I'd like to get practical straight away, I've already shared quite a bit of theory, is to get some insight into how you might be feeling. How is your nervous system doing on this Friday afternoon? And an exercise that I use regularly myself is this mindful minute. So I'm going to set my timer. I'll tell you when I start and when it ends for 1 minute. And over the 60 seconds, I invite you to bring your awareness to your breathing cycles and count how many breath cycles you take over the minute. So a breath cycle is an inhale and an exhale. Would be one cycle, right? So this might help to take your eyes away from the screen. You don't need to close your eyes unless you'd like to. And starting in 3, 2, 1, bring your awareness to your breath. And I invite you to count how many breath cycles you take over the next minute. There's no right or wrong way. We're just becoming aware of how we are, how our breath is in this moment. And if your mind has wandered, that's okay. With some curiosity and compassion, gently bring it back to my voice, back to your breath. That's 1 minute. I'm curious, if you're happy to share in the chat, how many breath cycles did you take in that minute? I actually totally forgot to count mine. I normally try and do that too. So we have 9, 12, 15, 7, 17, 9. So we've got a few single digits, quite a few double digits. Nikki, 6, Kirsty, great, great. Thank you for all the sharing. I appreciate that. So why the breath? And then what would be perhaps something that we could strive towards based on what some of the research is showing? The breath shows us so many things. 2 reasons for the purpose of this exercise is it gives you some insight into potentially whether you're in the sympathetic or the parasympathetic state. So the first part of the body that gets affected generally is the breath, because the heart rate increases to prepare you to go into the fight or flight. That happens definitely before your conscious mind realizes that you're even stressed. So when you become aware of your breath, it can give you really valuable information. And when you bring your awareness to your breath, you probably might start changing it. And ideally, a lot of the research is showing that we should be aiming to take 6 to 8 breath cycles per minute. So breathing in for about 5.5 to 6 seconds and then out for 5.5 to 6 seconds is about the ideal way to get into what we call heart coherence. That helps your heart rate variability and helps you stay more in the calmer state. So that doesn't mean that the stress is not happening around you. It just means that you can potentially stop that spiral of going down the fight or flight. Because if you don't stop it, if we keep taking shallow, fast breaths, and if the body contracts as it will, we can then lose holistic functioning of the brain. We know this. We have, the amygdala starts to hijack the prefrontal cortex, and we lose the ability for big picture thinking, problem solving, creative thinking. We get very focused on just the stressor at hand. It's a primal response that we all have. And so by slowing down your breath, and we can't consciously change what we're not conscious of in the first place, we can help the nervous system to save energy and potentially for our mind to stay optimal in the way that it functions. So this mindful minute could be, if this is the one thing you take from today, that's amazing. It took me I'd say a few years to get this to be an inbuilt habit. For a long time, I had a post-it note on my kettle and an alarm that went off every mid-afternoon that would remind me to just check in with my breath. And the days that I ignored the alarm were the days that I needed it the most. Because if you don't have 60 seconds once in your day, and ideally mid-morning and mid-afternoon would be a good time to do this, to bring a little bit of awareness to your nervous system and your breath, well, then there could be a bigger issue going on. So this is a wonderful technique that the more you practice it, the easier it gets. Ideally, I'd love you to be doing this every hour. So as you're transitioning from back-to-back meetings, to allow yourself 60 seconds to bring your awareness to your breath. And by doing that, automatically you start slowing it down, because it's better to be consistent than intense. I always say consistency over intensity. So rather pepper your day. It's a bit like seasoning food. We don't want a bucket load of pepper or too much salt. We just want a little bit to enhance the flavor. This kind of technique can help to enhance the flavor and the energy and the performance and resilience that you get out of your day. So breathing is an essential skill that most of us are not doing correctly or optimizing. And when we pay more attention to our breath, we can really help the nervous system a lot. What it can also do is highlighted in one of my favorite quotes from the author of Man's Search for Meaning. You may have read Viktor Frankl's book, from his experience of being a survivor through the Holocaust and being in the concentration camps, and seeing and witnessing how some people thrived and were able to stay resilient with a sense of purpose, and others didn't. And the quotes that I'm referring to is specifically, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. when we learn to breathe a little bit more deeper, and if we take a breath when we're listening to somebody, when we're having a conversation, when we're presenting like I'm doing now, or you're sitting with a loved one or your child, and they might have caused you to feel stressed, instead of reacting, you can take a deep breath, maybe even more than one, and come from a place of strength and growth, and rather respond rather than react. And by practicing things like the mindful minute, when the stakes are not that high, like the middle of your afternoon or just before your lunch break, or as you start your work in the mornings, when you really need it, when you're in the middle of an intense negotiation, or you're dealing with a difficult case client, or you're in a difficult conversation, you're then more likely to default to what you've actually practiced. And I know that this week, through well-being and wellness and the conversations you've had, there's various different aspects to well-being. I mean, it's a vast topic. To give us some context for today, we have our physical well-being. So that relates to the body. That's how fit we feel, how supple, our digestion, how we eat, our energy levels, our health numbers, like our cholesterol. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that. We've also got our emotional well-being, which I've already discussed lightly, around understanding our emotions, being able to articulate them, being able to regulate the stress response. We've got our mental, our intellect, this 4-pound universe that sits on our shoulders, the ability to think and problem solve and keep big picture thinking. And then we also have a sense of meaning, which could be our spirituality, our sense of belonging or contribution. It's where our reason of why we do what we do comes from. And all 4 of these dimensions are important. And there are others. We could include social, environmental, financial. But for today, for the time that we have, I'd like us to take a look specifically at how we can optimize our physical well-being. So how can we all make sure that we're doing the fundamental things? Because it's easy to forget about the fundamentals when we are very stressed. They go out that proverbial window. And if you don't have the fundamentals in place, if your physical well-being is not at its best, you cannot optimize your emotional and mental well-being. I'm sure you know this. If you are sleep deprived, dehydrated, and you haven't eaten, and your blood sugar is dropping, it's going to be that much harder to regulate your emotions, to think clearly. I know, I get hangry if I just miss one meal. So I get irritable and I get really hungry for certain types of foods, let alone have energy and capacity and resource left for contribution and belonging and giving back. So we're going to take a look and see how are you doing in terms of your physical well-being. And I'm also going to share, as I have already, some techniques that can help with your emotional and mental well-being. That pyramid that I just showed you makes me think of how I grew up. Now, I mentioned that my parents come from the Champagne region in France. So in my childhood photo albums, because we didn't have Facebook when I was growing up, but there's all these pictures of champagne glasses filled like that whenever there were birthdays or get-togethers. And my parents would do that. They'd pour the champagne in the top glass, it would overflow. It was always done, by the way, on a silver tray. And my mom would sip like if any of the champagne had spilled. But that struck me as an adult about how that links to our energy is contagious. We know that. And if you're the top glass and you have effervescence in yourself, we have to look after our own effervescence first. If you're feeling flat, everything seems flat. David White, my favorite poet, he's a poet and philosopher and Irish, very intelligent, I think insightful man, has a poem about burnout and his own experience of it called Sweet Darkness. And the opening lines are, when your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. Time to go into the dark. So when we're tired, everything feels tired. When we're flat, everything feels flat. But when we cultivate our own effervescence through curiosity, through managing our well-being physically and emotionally, we not only help ourselves stay lighter and more buoyant, or whatever effervescence means for you, but maybe we're even able to overflow and fill those around us when they need that. So I thought I'd include that because it is a Friday afternoon and I actually am going for champagne after this. Not that you need, I'm not promoting that you drink champagne. I always say that if you are going to drink alcohol, to drink it consciously. And for me, that means drinking to celebrate, not to forget. So rather than changing your state after you've had a long, hard day, to drink it more conscientiously from a place of joy, and to always have days in the week where you don't drink any alcohol. to give your liver a bit of a chance to rest. But let's take a look. This is a question that you're going to have an answer to before we wrap up today. If your body were to give you a score, what would it be? And to help us do that, we're going to go through the WELLculator. So the WELLculator is a framework that I put together quite a while ago. I was in clinical practice as a dietitian for 5 years. And then in 2006, I started doing work for Vitality in Johannesburg, the health insurer that we now know because they're also here. And I designed the WELLculator as a way to do group presentations. So it's science-backed. It looks at the fundamentals around managing our physical well-being. And it's a bit of a calculation of potentially how well you're doing. And so we're going to visit 10 different areas. The first 4 relate to nutrition and hydration. Then we go into strategic rest, strategic movement, and we touch back on mindfulness and emotional well-being. You don't need to remember it if you're keeping notes because it helps you concentrate, because I do that, that's great. I will, and I'm happy to share the slides. I will send a follow-up note with the WELLculator attached. In fact, I'd love you to print it out and keep it somewhere that you can refer back to it every now and again, maybe even share it with a loved one. Because when we teach something that we've just learned, it can often help embed that learning. So to get us started, let's start with my topic of passion. That's because I am a French foodie and a dietitian. So how would you answer this question? Have you got a refueling strategy that helps to maintain or manage your energy levels and health? So are you eating in a way, 80% of the time, so most of the time, do you have a plan around the way that you feed yourself to help keep your energy up and your health good? Before you answer the question, let me show you what I come across a lot. A lot of us are waking up in the morning, there's morning mayhem. Maybe you're tired because you've been awake between 3 and 5. We often don't wake up with that kind of alarm. I'm going to touch back to that. We then jump up, get going. Maybe we're coming back to the office. We're probably not dashing onto like our first Teams call. Then we have back-to-back meetings. So we have back-to-back cups of coffee. Even though we work from home, we don't really take time to stop. When we have lunch, we've still got screens open around us. So we're not fully savoring and stopping and eating mindfully. In the afternoon, we might look for a snack, another cup of coffee, something sweet, something salty. By the time we get home and we relax, maybe the kids are in bed, we maybe eat more than we need because we're so famished. And we might have wine and chocolate that bookends that meal. Can anybody relate to any aspect of what I've just shown on the slide? I see a few nods. If not, in a moment, I'm going to share with you another approach, and maybe you can relate to that. So as a nutritionist, I could spend a lot of time talking about why this isn't good from a nutritional perspective. But the main thing I'm going to focus on is 2 things. The color. So when you look at the screen, there's a lot of beige going on, right? Beige and brown. And if we're looking at owning the title CEO, Chief Energy Officer, or Chief Effervescent Officer, we need to stabilize and manage our blood glucose, our blood sugar, because that's where we get our fuel from. And eating this way, or not eating, because you're skipping meals potentially, can cause your blood glucose to go all over the show, which means your hormones like insulin will do the same. It can perpetuate the stress response. I know when my blood sugar drops, I not only get hangry, I can also potentially feel like I have a little bit of anxiety. So the brain and the heart and the gut, those 3 intelligent centers, are influenced by our blood glucose. So what helps is to stabilize them. And one way to do this is this way. I'm not saying this is the only way. It's important to be curious about what works for you. So if you are going to have breakfast and snacks and lunch, can you see that there's more than just brown or beige? So there's a huge tip there. Incorporating color is important. I'm going to go into a bit more detail in a moment around that. Also balancing protein with plant fats to help stabilize glucose can help, rather than just having carbohydrates. And if you want ideas and recipes, please reach out to me. I have lots, and there's many people out there that have incredibly easy, quick ideas that can help us to stay inspired and give us ideas around this. In the afternoon, like now, how would you rate your energy, by the way? Won't you pop that into the chat on a scale of 1 to 10? So 10 being that you're super energized, like physically, mentally, emotionally, you're feeling like you could keep going. 1 being, you wish you could have an afternoon siesta. So we've got an average, I think, of about 5 so far. Okay, we're 1.7, pushing it up. Oh, a 9. There we go. In the afternoons, if your energy is, I'd say, a 9 or less, is to ask yourself 2 things. Have I hydrated enough? Have I drunk enough water? That's a quick one. It's very easy to have 2 or 3 cups of tea or coffee, and then 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you have a headache, your energy drops, your mouth is dry, and that can be a trigger to feel hungry, but you're not really hungry. So ideally, a formula that I use is 1 glass of water per 10 kilograms that you weigh. Generally find that works well. So you can't see me, but I'm quite petite and short. So I don't weigh as much as perhaps somebody that's 6 foot who might need 10 glasses of water, and I only need about 5. So that's a good formula to help you. And that should be caffeine-free, sugar-free, alcohol-free. So if you are drinking coffee, to rather have coffee over and above that, because coffee tends to be a diuretic. It's your kidneys and your renal system to flush it out. So you lose some of that fluid. So are you hydrated? And secondly, have you had some fresh air? And how is your breath? How is your breath? From the mindful minute, which we did a short while ago, you probably forgot about your breath. So could you perhaps breathe a little bit more in? When you inhale, taking up a little bit more space by inflating more of your belly. So most of us don't use our full lung capacity. We generally breathe into the top part of the chest. And when we lengthen the exhale, even by 1 or 2 seconds, we can help the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, get ignited more than the sympathetic nervous system. So I give you full permission to sigh. If you're in an open office or if you've got a partner close by, they might wonder what you're doing, but that's okay. Let them be curious, a bit like the music at the start. And if you're doing something like this, or you've got a strategy that you use most of the time, it makes it easier then in the evenings to potentially, when we are relaxing, make better choices, or maybe not eat more than we need when we're actually about to go to bed and we don't need all that energy inside our system. So how does this happen? It happens with a little bit of preparation. Like anything with our work, with our personal lives, we need to spend a little bit of time planning. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do this every day. Once a month, what I do is I order recipes online. I really like Mindful Chef. Does anybody use Mindful Chef or Hello Gusto or Hello Fresh, where you get a box of healthy goodies with the recipe and they're quick and easy? I started that in the beginning of lockdown because I lost my mojo around cooking and I couldn't stop eating carrot cake. Did anybody else have a strange craving when COVID first hit? I ate more carrot cake in April and May 2020 than I have in my life. And that was definitely a sign of excess cortisol in my system. So, oh yeah, wine. Yeah, I had a craving for Jack Daniels. It was the strangest thing. I've never actually admitted this on a presentation before. I fell one day. I was still living in Parsons Green in London then. I've now moved out to Surrey. And I fell and grazed my knee quite badly, and people spread away from me. You know, usually when somebody falls and they hurt themselves, you run towards them, but nobody was running towards anybody back then. And it was my first experience of how life had changed. And I got a bottle of I didn't drink the bottle of Jack Daniels that night, but I had some and I remembered why. One of my favorite holidays as a young adult was in my late 20s when I went for 10 days to just outside of Porto in Mozambique. And I first scuba dived. So I've got lots of amazing memories of being on the beach, relaxing with great company, scuba diving for the first time and seeing fish underwater. And we were drinking Jack Daniels on that holiday. I haven't had Jack Daniels since then. It's not my kind of drink. I was just with people who drank it. And I was astonished how the body remembers everything and reminds me how what we suppress, the body will express. And if we suppress a lot of negative emotions, that can make us sick. You know, this is not a woo-woo concept. This is highly now substantiated by research. And I'm sure some of you know people like Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote When the Body Says No, or the research done by Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. So that's why it's important to keep a sense of humor and stay curious, because the body gives us lots of information. But I digress. Back to setting yourself up for success. ordering quick, healthy meals was something I did back then when I realized I didn't want to just eat carrot cake. And Mindful Chef since then, every Monday I get my box and I'm able to cook a quick meal at least for 2 nights in that week. I also shop for online snacks and then put it in my environment. So I call this shop, drop, stop. Stock up your environment with the right things to make it easier, and then remember to stop and have them. Now, remember I asked you to take a look at the color on the slides. One of the pieces of advice, whenever I'm asked as a dietitian or nutritionist, what should we do around food? I always say, eat like an artist. So make your meals, your plates, a canvas for color. And what I mean by that is not eating more M&Ms or Skittles or wine guns, but eating much more, because most of us are not eating enough, of fresh produce. So salads, vegetables, fruits. You know, if you think of your day yesterday, if you can remember what you were doing, if you were at home or maybe you were on the road, how much color did you have in the form of fresh produce? A portion would be about a tennis ball size or a fistful. So how many tennis ball portions of these kind of foods that you have yesterday? So that's quantity. And we want to aim for about 8 or more, closer to 10, if you really want to maximize antioxidant intake and promote longevity and reduce inflammation, which is what drives chronic disease like cancer and Alzheimer's and hypertension and diabetes. So you want to have about 8 tennis ball portions, unless, of course, you have an underlying issue that maybe the fiber will be too much for you, in which case I'd recommend that you speak to a nutritionist or a dietitian. Not just the quantity, but the quality is important. So the range of color. So are you eating red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo foods? So over a week, are you exposing yourself to all those different color pigments? Because then you get the bioactive compounds that are good for you. And when we're eating more of these foods, we help our gut stay healthy. And inside your gut, so if you place your hand on your belly button or on your belly, behind that hand, inside your large colon and your digestive tract, you have more species of bacteria than there are species in the rainforest. They are so important and such an important essential part of your immune system. And that when they flourish, we are better able to stay strong and resilient on an immune level. However, because of stress, because of poor lifestyle choices and poor diet choices, because of antibiotics and certain medications, we can cause an imbalance in the microbiome. And so we don't fully maximize our gut health. And we know that the gut is called the second brain. It's connected to the brain. I was astonished as a dietitian whenever I worked with patients who had anxiety and IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. If they got given an antidepressant, their bowel symptoms would become better. Or if we looked at the bowel, sometimes the sense of anxiety or depression would lighten. My mother has had that experience. In fact, as a personal story, because I'm so close to my mom and I understand her journey of well-being, my mom was very stressed in her 20s when she realized she was staying in South Africa. Because remember, she was going on honeymoon. And my mom's from a family of 7. So she has 6 brothers and sisters. My father is an only child. So easier for him to perhaps make the transition to choose to stay in the foreign country because they got work opportunities that they weren't expecting. However, it took my mom a bit of time to get used to it. And she did develop quite bad constipation and her skin flared up and she was diagnosed with a form of psoriasis called Darier's disease. And every time she would have a lot of stress, her tummy wouldn't work so well and her skin would flare up. And about 7 years ago, she went through a very stressful time again and her skin was particularly bad. So she had, for the first time it happened, it came up her neck and it was on her face. You can see from the photo, she's very inflamed, a lot of red. She was in pain, it was sore. She would lie with wet towels and a fan and she could not take more of the neostigazine, was the corticosteroid that she was taking because it was really bad for her liver. So she saw a doctor who asked her questions about her lifestyle for the first time in the context of her skin. And they picked up about her anxiety. My mom's a very busy lady. She struggled to rest and that her tummy wasn't that good. So my mom was told to focus on eating more fiber and to take a probiotic. So she helped her microbiome come back into balance that way and to do 5 or 10 minutes of mindfulness. So to learn how to sit still and be with her thoughts and her emotions. And over 4 months, dramatic improvement. I took the photograph, her skin cleared, her tummy was fine. And over the years since then, she's never had to take the corticosteroid treatment again. But when she compromises on eating lots of colorful foods and fiber, and her tummy starts to not be that well, her skin will start to itch. And then there's a link to her anxiety and depression too. And this was during lockdown. So in 2020, her skin is still cleared, years on. And can you see what she's eating? That was her birthday. It was the 15th of June. I'm actually on the phone. You can't see, I'm actually crying because the flowers I had arranged to be delivered on her birthday arrived while I was having a 15-minute conversation with her in the morning. And when that kind of stuff happens and you don't plan it, I was just so joyful. But she's eating a very beige breakfast, right? So that's a French lady. On her birthday, she wants to have croissant et café. And this highlights the 80-20 principle. When you look after your gut 80% of the time, you give it what it needs. You invest a bit of time and energy to do that. There are times where you don't need to get it perfectly right, and you'll still be okay and still optimize your well-being. So if you want more tips on this, please reach out to me, because this is about as far as I'm going to go around nutrition as such. One of the things that helps me is I always try to put the color on my plate first, whether I'm at home or traveling, as I'm now doing and eating out a lot. If you put the chicken and the rice or the spaghetti or the pasta or the fish and chips on your plate first, how much space is left for the color, if there is even color? So I find that quite a good strategy. So we've looked at strategic refueling to help balance your energy and good health, eating like an artist to support your gut health, being mindful when you eat, so actually stopping if you can to enjoy a meal and savor the flavors rather than being distracted by screens, because it's very hard for rest and digest to take place when you're in fight or flight, because it's not important to digest your lunch if your body thinks that you're going to be chased by a wild animal. And we've taken a look at hydration. If you are eating well, and maybe you're even taking supplements, how do you know that it's working for you? That's why knowing your health numbers is so important. And I hope that some of you are thinking or already are checking a few things. Is anybody checking things like cholesterol, glucose, vitamin D, to find out what's happening inside your body? Is anybody doing that? And if you are, feel free just to put a yes or to mention in the chat what you're checking for. Because it's hard to know if something's working. Like I mentioned that last year, this time, I was feeling exhausted and what felt like perimenopausal, but overnight. And turns out that my magnesium and vitamin D levels were subclinically low, even though I was taking 300 milligrams of magnesium and vitamin D on most days. I changed the type of vitamin D I was taking, doubled the magnesium, and then the levels rectified themselves. So super interesting. If you are spending money on supplements, I always say spend a little bit of money on these tests. You don't need to go to your GP. You can order these online. I'll put in the chat the places that I use. There's quite a few. Fourth for Life, do some simple tests. There's a real golden standard. It's a pricey test, but it's if you're really into your well-being and you want to check things, Metabolo Mix is like a golden standard. And there's a few other companies out there too. So yeah, it's great that you check your blood sugar. Your blood sugar, for all of us really, before we're diabetic, we should take a look maybe at something called HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin, which gives you an indication of how you've managed your blood glucose levels over the past 3 months, the 12 weeks before then. So these tests are becoming easier to do and quite cost effective. And I would suggest that once a year, it's a bit like doing an MOT on your body. You just have an idea of, are there things you need to be concerned about? Because stress creates lots of wear and tear. So really important to have a check. And also when you do tests like this, you can find out about your unique blueprint and what your body needs rather than just guessing. And you can design a health plan that works for you. I think this personalized approach to medicine is where the future of well-being is going, rather than just this genetic thing, you know. Intermittent fasting may work for some people. It doesn't work if you're in burnout. And if you've got certain genetics, like you can test your genetics and you can see what kind of exercise your body responds to better, what supplements you may need more of. And that's really where you become smart about your well-being. I have done more than enough talking. You're now going to have an opportunity to go into what I call not a breakout room, but breakthrough rooms, because often in the breakout rooms, we can have some breakthroughs. So it's going to be a short time, 4 minutes, where you have an opportunity to chat with I'll put 2 or 3 people in each room. If you do not want to go into the breakout rooms, you're welcome to stay here with me and you can have a chat with me or just stay quiet. We will be able to share and reflect on the question for about 4 minutes. So if you think about what you're currently doing, what you've been doing so far in 2022, please start with celebrating. So what's going well? What's going well around the way that you're eating, your mindfulness around meals, your strategy around testing your health and hydration? And where do you potentially see that you could improve? Okay, so I'm going to create the breakout rooms and I will see you back here in 4 minutes or so. So you should have an invitation to go into a room. If you're on your own, please wait for a moment, take a deep breath, and I'll make sure that somebody comes to join you.
Is being recorded. Being recorded.
Welcome back, everyone. We've got a few more seconds. Sometimes it can feel like the time portal grabs you and pulls you back. Welcome back, everybody. Were there some celebrations going on? Okay, good. That's important. I'm going to mention that before we wrap up, because that's a big, important part of behavior change. And were there some areas that potentially have come up for improvement as well? All right. Okay. There was a question around what tests or what things you should test for. As a basic baseline, I've popped this into the chat. Cholesterol, but ideally the full spectrum, so like the lipogram, which means you find out about your good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, triglycerides, rather than just your overall cholesterol. And checking glucose, especially that HbA1c, which is an indication of how you've regulated your glucose over maybe 3 months. If you have hypertension or blood pressure in the family, or somebody has cardiovascular issues, I would maybe look at getting a blood pressure device too. And then if you're spending money on any supplements once in a while, I would check that your body's actually absorbing them. And then, of course, if you've got certain symptoms, there's other things you could check for. But don't do this on your own. I would definitely speak to a nutritionist or a dietitian, or reach out to me. If I can help you, I will. If it feels like it's maybe too much, I'll try and find somebody in my network who can be a support for you. But these tests are becoming easier, and really, like I shared earlier, can add enormous quality of life and can save you money, which I'm all for that too. All for that. So we're going to move on to, we've gone through about half of the Wellculator so far, and we're going to move on to another very important number. And that is the amount of hours of sleep that you get. How many hours of sleep did you have last night? Can you pop that into the chat? Do you remember? Do you know? Was it enough? That's the most important thing. So we have 8, 7, 6, 7, 7.5, 5, 6. It's quite high. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Okay. Would anybody here like either more sleep or better quality sleep? Just put a yes into the chat. Okay, yours was heavily interrupted. I'm wondering if there's a little baby in the house or a pet or, I don't know, a noisy. Oh, definitely. Yes, yes, more sleep. Okay. All right. Your cats won't allow it. Yeah. Sleep apnea. I'm busy reading an incredible book, which might be interesting. Breathe by James Nestor. Please, please consider downloading it or listening to at least one podcast where this man is interviewed. The link that he makes to how we breathe and sleep apnea is possibly the most common sense one I have seen. Yeah. So sleep is incredibly important. And sleep only works well if we actually give ourselves permission to strategically rest during the day. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not suggesting that you take a power nap every day or have a siesta, but I am suggesting that you think about how you start your day and how you approach your day, so that when you get to when you want to sleep, which I call winter, it's the same as hibernating at the end of the day. It's not like a major surprise to your brain and your body that, oh, I've just been going at like 70 miles an hour and now you want me to just stop and switch off and surrender. Because the act of falling asleep is the greatest surrender. You know, there's some philosophers that call it practicing for death. It really is a miracle. And as I call myself a recovering insomniac, I went through terrible insomnia when I went through a big life change about 8 years ago. And every now and again, it comes back and it becomes difficult for me and I have to go back to the basics. These are the basics. I like to use nature as a framework because nature is so good for us. It's a food group, according to me. It really is essential. And if we take the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and we overlap it into a 24-hour day. So if I could, I would sing, but I don't sing. So 4 seasons in one day by, it's a Crowded House or REM, Crowded House, I think. Yeah. So if we think about 4 seasons in one day, spring would be your mornings. As you wake up and you become conscious that you're awake, you're probably still lying in bed. Then spring ends and summer starts the moment you are potentially pulled into the fight or flight response. That means you've engaged with the outside world, either through your phone, picking up your phone and answering WhatsApps, jumping onto emails, maybe behind your computer, maybe putting on the telly and watching the news, or going onto social media, even Instagram, because you don't know what's going to come your way and something could trigger you. And that's when you go into summer. Then we're in summer for the whole workday. And I know that as a team at QCS, how hard you're working and the pressures that you're under, and how potentially at the end of the day, it might be difficult to switch off. So we're going to speak about some techniques that may help. So that when you get to put your head on the pillow and you're lying in bed and you want those 7, 8, or 9 hours of sleep, that you're actually able to hibernate, to fall into a deep, restful sleep. To sleep well, though, we have to look at how we start our days. So let's start at the beginning. How long was your spring this morning? So how long was it from when you became conscious that you were awake? And I'm curious, remember that first picture I showed you of the food and the alarm clock? Most of us aren't using old-fashioned type clocks. We're using our phones. And the danger with that is that when we wake up, we can often check the phone before we check in with our own heart. So we don't know how we're feeling, but then we find out what's happening in the world. So pop into the chat. Generally, how long is your spring? Is it 3 minutes? Is it half an hour? Is it 30 minutes? Is it 1 hour? How long before you get the outside world flooding in through social media or work or the television? Okay, so you've got, thanks to your the half percent, well, that's not so cool if they're hitting the snooze button off, but you've got 40 minutes in time in bed, 15, 1 minute, 2 hours, 15 minutes. Okay, so quite a range. All right, it's been hard for me to find what the ideal guideline is. And what I'm finding through some of the neuroscience work and some people that I respect is if you're working an 8 to 10 hour day, which I know you all are, and potentially 12 hours or longer, we need at least an hour, potentially at the beginning and the end of the day, at least maybe 90 minutes, to try and balance out that intensity of the summer where we're so productive and engaged. Because once we start engaging with the outside world, Brene Brown speaks about this. We put on masks and we create armor. We show up potentially because like we can't, you know, we need to respond in a certain way. And also as we wake up in the morning, even if you've had a restless night, your nervous system is probably at its most rested. So the longer you can linger in that state of rest and digest, where the parasympathetic nervous system is actually engaged, the better. And we generally have more say over our mornings than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. So now that you're conscious about this, and whether your spring is 1 minute or it's 1 hour, what would it take for you to be able to lengthen your spring by maybe 10%? So maybe for you, it's making it 2 minutes instead of 1 minute, or maybe it's making it 45 minutes instead of half an hour. I know for me, I'm at my best and I feel as if I've put myself first if I have 90 minutes in the morning before I pick up my phone and start engaging with it, because I live through my phone, as many of you do, you know, from Slack calls to Team to Zoom to WhatsApp. It's, you know, it's easy for me not to come to my computer, my laptop for an hour or so, but to stay off my phone can be a bit more challenging. So I invite you to bring your awareness back to your breath, because remember, we're seasoning our day. So notice how you're breathing and maybe take a deep breath in. And as you take a deep breath in, filling your belly with air and lengthening your exhale, letting your shoulders drop towards the ground, maybe giving your jaw permission to relax if it is a bit tense. I carry lots of tension in my jaw. Ask yourself this question. If anything were possible, how would I like to tune into my day? Would you like maybe 5 minutes of sitting with a cup of tea and looking out the window and just thinking? David Rock, who's a neuroscientist who has designed the brain platter, one of the ingredients on the brain platter, if we want good mental health and a strong, healthy mind and brain, we need to give ourselves permission to daydream. Most of us don't daydream anymore because we don't get bored. We fill the gaps in our day constantly with input through these devices. So being aware of how you start your day can help a lot. And then once you get pulled into summer and you're busy, there's a few things that you can do. I'm hoping that you're doing 1 or 2 of these, or that you'll take one thing. Because once we start engaging with our day, our energy starts to drop. So we wake up, we've got what I call a full battery, and emotional and mental demands and physical demands mean that the battery starts to drain. So just like you would charge your phone or your laptop if you were not plugging it in and you were using it in the day, it would need to be recharged. Are you recharging yourself? And the way you can recharge yourself, these are 3 basic things, is 20-20-20. And what I mean by that is every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. So why don't we try that now? I give you permission, look away from the screen. Ideally, look out a window, or if you need to look behind you, if you've got a wall in front of you, look far away from your screen. And blink your eyes, help to lubricate your eyes. This helps with visual strain. And take 2 deep breaths. Because if you take 2 slow, deep breaths, chances are that's about 20 seconds, depending on how many seconds you're using for each breath cycle. And blink again and then come back to the screen. Now, we didn't adjourn this meeting, but you took a quick micro break. And what that does for your nervous system, and it helps with your brainwave activity too, because we're constantly in beta brainwave when we're focused and alert and working like this. And these little micro pauses can give us perspective, help us stop getting pulled into that stress response where everything becomes constricted and we frown and we come closer to the screen and we hunch our shoulders and clench our jaw. It gives you a little moment of realizing, oh, I can breathe. Oh, my right shoulder is like quite tense. So that's the first one. The second one is to stretch for 1 or 2 minutes every hour, even if you have back-to-back meetings, to be aware of your posture. So right now, I give you permission to maybe just stretch and twist around in your chair. If you want to stand up, if you're able to, great. Step away from your desk, even better. I'm hoping that if you are working at home, because we know now that this hybrid working is here to stay, that you've maybe invested in maybe a little sit-stand desk, or you're able to move and talk, or you're maybe even got some like stretch bands or a cushion that you can stand on with your feet that helps with what we call proprioception and gets you balancing, or you've got a really good quality chair. These are like non-negotiables now. We have never, ever sat as much as we do. We are so sedentary, and the combination of sedentary time, especially more than 5 hours a day behind a screen, and now there's difficulty of not having mirror neurons, and there's no real non-verbal cues going on. I can't pick up on your energy. You're really having to focus to pay attention to me and my voice without seeing me in the room. That's exhausting. And motion can help shift our emotion. So staying agile and moving can help the body not get pulled into that tense ball that we get into. And most of us are far too tense. That's why we have headaches, we don't breathe correctly. And so of course at night, we're not going to sleep well. And then please, please pretend that you are French or Italian, maybe not Spanish, because the Spanish take a really long lunch. I'm not suggesting a 2-hour lunch, but I am suggesting a 20-minute break in the middle of your day where you turn your phone upside down and you sit with yourself and breathe and think about what's happened and where you're going for the rest of the day. Because otherwise all these hours just blur into each other and days blur, and then it's a Friday, and then we're living for the weekends, and then we're living for the summer, and then we're living for the new year. And if you're okay with that, that's okay. It doesn't have to be the way that we live. We know that when we slow down our breath, our perception of time can change, and we can be the ones that help others to not feel as if life is just this thing that happens so quickly and we're constantly rushing towards the next. And we can be more mindful and more in the moment. And I've already shared with you the mindful minute. So when you are aware of your breath and your musculature and you give yourself permission to relax during the day, it's like you're training for the big event at the end of the day. When you want to sleep, it's a bit like running a marathon. You shouldn't just run a marathon without training, and so this is like training for the big rest, the big surrender. I know this principle helps me. If I give myself permission to stop in the day, and sometimes I know the most productive thing I can do is do nothing, even if it is just to look away from my screen for 20 seconds. It can help me create that gap between stimulus and response, and I respond more than react. It makes me a better person. I don't say things that I regret. I don't send off an email with 3 typos because I'm actually able to keep my prefrontal cortex fully engaged because I'm not getting pulled into the stress response. So now we get to the end of our day as we are today, and Fridays are obviously, I'm sure, a bit different to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But how do you end your day? And now that times have changed as they are, where we have these blurred lines. I mean, in the past, we would have been out on the road, maybe leaving the office, saying goodbye to colleagues, driving, commuting, walking back through our front doors, being greeted by pets and family. And so there were lots of signs that we were entering a different time of day. When you're working from your home office or on the kitchen counter or on the dining room, depending on who's got the office for the day, especially if there's more than one person at work, at home, we're not working at home. I sometimes feel like we're living at work. We need to become very aware of how do we create rituals that help us transition. For instance, what I've started doing is changing my clothes at the end of my day. I really try and get outside, even just for a 5-minute walk. It might not be when I exercise, but it ends my day. I close my office door. I'm fortunate to have a room that I can say that's where I work. I've got a client who goes and sits in her car for 10 minutes because she would have commuted for an hour. We live in extraordinary times, so we need extraordinary measures. And I think we need to stay curious about how we approach our well-being in a different way. Because there'll always be work to do, right? I mean, what word would you use to describe how this gentleman might be feeling? Maybe pop that into the chat. Tired, overwhelmed, exhausted. There's always going to be emails to read, proposals to think about, articles and things to do. It takes courage and boundaries to say, I'm going to stop now. I've done enough. I've still got things to do, and I need to sustain my energy because it's February 2022. And if I'm working at this pace now, how am I going to feel in June and July, let alone November? And so if we want to feel more like what she may be feeling, serene, peaceful, calm, we need to create boundaries. And these are very personal, right? I specifically use the map of France because of the Champagne region. And you may know that for a champagne to be called champagne, it has to contain grapes that come from that Champagne region, which I know well because my family are from there. If it's not, then it can't be called champagne. It's either an English sparkling wine, if it's maybe made like in Sussex, or it's a cava or prosecco, but it's not champagne. What do you need for your effervescence? And we need to regularly check in with ourselves. Like now during winter, I need 9 hours of sleep. In summer, I don't. I need less. So I've got to create boundaries around how I socialize. I can't socialize as much potentially in winter and keep my energy and effervescence as high as it is. And when we're feeling exhausted and tired, sometimes it's not just about rest. It's about having the things in our life that bring us joy, that make us feel wholehearted. Have you got enough things that bring you a sense of joy? How are your hobbies going? There's this beautiful expression, take your tired heart and turn it into art. And at the end of your day, by bringing in a little bit of time, maybe, I've started building jigsaw puzzles. I've started reading French books. And I don't do it for a long time. I do it for 10 or 15 minutes. I might listen to a piece of music. I've become recently aware of just how powerful music is to help change our state. I've really deepened my gratitude practice. And I know that some of you did this week. Cheers for peers, right? Expressing gratitude is good for the person that receives it, but it's so good for you too, because you release dopamine and other feel-good chemicals. So the end of the day, I think we need to get a lot more creative around how can we bring in some joy for ourselves. That often means staying away from these devices that keep us connected 24/7, that can strip us of our joy. And so as I invite you to become aware of your breath again, and take a deep breath in, is ask yourself, let your imagination go. If anything were possible, how would you tune out of your day? How would you choose to end your day? By asking these questions, we can stimulate the imagination, and that can often bring up ideas. And I always say, when we keep curious, it helps us keep a growth mindset. And so we think of solutions that we may not have. And so when you get into bed at 9 or 10 or 11, whenever that might be, you're able to better drop quickly into deep delta theta brainwave activity and go through the sleep cycles that you need. But only if you've really given yourself the opportunity to not be so wired during the day. So if you were to reflect on not just rest and sleep, but specifically also mindfulness, have you got a mindfulness practice? And that can be something, it can be a meditation. It can be a walking meditation. It can be where you spend time in nature, walking the dogs, but without your phone. Maybe it's a gratitude practice or journaling. We do need to bring in more mindfulness if we want to help to regulate the nervous system and also help us to cultivate a sense of presence. And this helps us to get the most out of every moment. So I'm going to stop sharing there because I wanted to ask you if you can share in the chat if anybody does have a mindfulness practice like gratitude, journaling, meditation, any kind of breath work that you might be doing. Is anybody doing any kind of mindfulness? I've been keeping a gratitude journal for a long time, over 5 years. I bought one of those books that has one line a day for 5 years at a time. And it's so rewarding when you can look back and see what you were grateful for today, a year ago or 2 years ago. Evening meditation, though not all the time. There's a lovely resource called Healing Hub. It's an app that I've been using for almost 2 years that has relaxation meditations for the evening. And in the morning, they've got something called breathing space that incorporates breath work, breath retention, and primal releasing. So while you're in bed, you get to throw a tantrum. I found it very strange at first, but now I've become almost addicted. My body wants that. And I do it about 4 or 5 times a week in bed for 10 or 15 minutes in the morning. It's great to see how many of you are doing these kind of practices. Okay. Oh, legs up the wall. That's a new thing for me. I've started dancing again. And when I get back from dancing, I do legs up the wall for 10 or 15 minutes and everything, especially my kidneys that take a bit of strain, get extra blood flow. That's great. So that can be your mindfulness practice. The key for something to be considered mindfulness is that it's intentional and it's done with kindness. So compassion. We've already spoken about the importance of activating and moving. We know that intentional exercise is very important, so we should be doing. a combination of some weight-bearing exercise, especially if you're over 40, because that helps to sustain lean muscle mass, and flexibility training, as well as cardiovascular training. So I find that it's easy for me to go for maybe a walk, a brisk walk, or to dance, but I can forget about stretching. And stretching is important, especially when you're sitting for as long as we are. And then lastly, on the Wellculator, which we've touched on, is do you know when your body is responding to stress? And have you got techniques that you can use in the moment to help with that? So when I say, do you know what's happening in your body? I like to link it back to champagne or wine. This is a photograph that I took when I was in South Africa in 2019. And you can see the roses at the end of each row of vines. And some of you may know why roses are often at the end of each row of vines. Do you know? The reason, I mean, it looks beautiful, but that would be quite a costly exercise, right? They are there because the roses will get affected by a mildew or a certain bug before the vine does. So it's an alarm system. Whoever is caring for the vines will notice that the roses are struggling and pay attention, because if you don't, I mean, the loss is huge. It's the whole crop. Now, when we ignore our roses, our alarm systems, that's when we head down the road towards burnout. And most of us have got a lot of these roses and alarm systems going on. What helps is to maybe think of it in terms of your physical well-being, your emotional well-being. I like to notice, like in my body, when I clench my jaw a lot, I know that I'm stressed. So I constantly relax my jaw. If I bite my nails, then I know that something's worrying me. If I withdraw from my friends, so if I want to go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock at night and I don't want to go out, that's my heart telling me something's not quite right. If I struggle to focus, or if I work too much, I tend towards workaholism, then I also know I could be stressed. And if I do catastrophize, which is not something I do a lot, that can be an alarm bell for me. And I find these 4 dimensions helpful in being curious about how am I, and how do I want to be? What I would like you to do now, as we come to a close, is to score yourself on the Wellculator. I'm going to remind you about the journey we went on. And what I invite you to do is give yourself 1 point if you answer yes, and no point if you answer no. And to get the points, you need to do it 80% of the time. So most of the time. So most of the time, 80% of the time. Are you a strategic refueler? Do you eat in a way that helps to balance your blood glucose so that you have good energy and good health? So have you got a strategy around the way that you eat that helps you do that? Yes or no? Do you eat like an artist? So are you helping your gut health? To do that, you need to have 8 tennis ball portions of a rainbow color, a rainbow spectrum of plant-based foods on most days of the week. Do you practice mindful eating? So it's okay to eat some meals on the run, but most of your meals, do you actually stop and eat and savor the meals? Give your body chance to actually digest it without being too distracted. Are you hydrating enough? So are you having a glass of water for every 10 kilograms that you weigh? Do you know your health numbers? As a minimum, once a year, are you checking cholesterol and glucose? And if you're taking supplements, having a look at some of those. Are you getting enough sleep? So 80% of the time, do you wake up feeling, I've had a great night's rest? Quality and quantity. Do you have some kind of mindfulness practice? So that can be meditation, legs up the wall, but it's something that you do on most days with intention and kindness towards yourself, and no extra stimulus coming in from screens and things like that. Are you moving your body every hour? Are you getting up and stretching? Are you aware of your breath? Are you taking, an eye strain, an eye break? Are you doing enough intentional exercise? It's probably about half an hour on every day of the week that we need, and a combination of stretching with weight-bearing exercise and cardiovascular, so something that gets your heart rate up. And lastly, do you know when you're responding to the stress response? And do you have at least one strategy that you can use in the moment, such as the mindful minute? to help you better manage that so that your alarm system doesn't keep shouting at you and things start breaking down. I'm curious if you're happy to share, what is your Wellculator score today? Knowing that if you do this in a month's time, it might change. That's the idea, hoping that it does. What is your score though today? Okay, we've got a 2 coming in. Great, it's got a 7, got a 2, got a 3. The average is about 4 or 5. So, okay, I'll wait another few seconds to see some scores come through. A 3, 3, 3, 6.5. So even if your score was 10, because that's the ideal score, right? So most of the time, do these things. Because if you have an 8 or a 9 out of 10, but maybe you're not getting enough sleep, or maybe you're very stressed, that's really a weighted one not to be answering yes to. So it's not that you need a high score, but what I find this reflects is a lot of this is not rocket science. You know this. However, the highest score in the room seems to be about a 7 or so. So what I do know is if you try and change too much at once, you will set yourself up for failure. So what I invite you to do is, what is one thing on the Wellculator that you feel a leaning towards doing? So don't maybe choose hydration if you're like, actually, I could really hydrate better, rather than activate your body, because the idea of getting a sit-stand desk just doesn't call to you, and you're like, you don't know when you're going to get up and find 2 minutes every hour to stretch. But the hydration you can do. Go towards something that you feel is easier. And then what you do is, as you're doing that new behavior, you make it tiny to do, and you catch yourself doing it so you feel good. Because we change most when we feel good, not bad. So when you're drinking a glass of water with your morning coffee, you're able to, I'm actually drinking a glass of water. And that's what your goal is, 1 glass of water with your morning coffee. If you anchor new behaviors, new tiny behaviors with something that you already do, it makes it easier for you to actually do it. And then you're able to celebrate. So keeping that in mind, what is going to be your tiny pledge? And if you're happy to pop it into the chat, there's something quite powerful about sharing what you're going to do. What is something that you're feeling motivated towards changing? And you've got 4 weeks to do it. I'm going to put the Wellculator back up so that you can take a look. We've got 4 weeks before we can do a check-in and see how you're doing on this one strategy. So I'd like you to think about, what is your tiny habit going to be that you're going to start based on the time and energy that you've put to being here today with me? And how are you going to make it super easy and obvious to do? Because the easier and the more obvious it is, I'm going to share more about the behavioral science at the check-in session that can help you set yourself up for success. So what aspect of the Wellculator do you feel you could make a shift towards? And if you're happy to pop that in the chat, I would welcome that. We've got hydration. We've got somebody who's going to focus on breath and being aware of the stress response, hydration, stretching more, eating lunch away from a desk. I like that. Intentional exercise, eating aspect. And right now, can you maybe send yourself an email or a message, or write it down on a note? Or if you're keen to share it with somebody, the more specific you are about what it is you're going to do, and set yourself a reminder, because I'm conscious that it's a Friday afternoon, and I'd like you to remember what your Wellculator pledge was on Monday when you get back into workspace. And when we check in with each other, which is on the 10th of March at 3 o'clock, we're able to talk about challenges, but also about potential celebrations and how to fine tune your strategy to owning the title Chief Energy Officer. Okay, activation and moving. Because it's these small things, when we are consistent at them, before long, it feels like we start doing what's necessary. So what's necessary is what you've made a pledge towards, nothing else. Because then you end up doing the impossible. Like cold showers. I never would have thought I would ever do them. And over 2 years of slowly training myself, I actually swim out in lakes now and get cold, which is alarming for a South African. Between now and then, I will share a thank you note, I think with Kirsty, who will share it with you. You can access the Wellculator in that note. You can also access me. So if you want to reach out to me, if you have any questions, you've got a lot of support within QCS, but I'm also part of the support now. So I welcome anybody reaching out to me. I mean that sincerely. If I can help you, I will. And if I can't, I'll do my best to find a resource that can. And I want to celebrate you and say Santé. You know, Santé means cheers in French. It also means health. And I wish you good health, and that your tiny habit becomes a strategy to helping you feel a lot more energized and effervescent. And I just want to also say thank you to Nikki for supporting the team through well-being, through these times that just demand so much from us.
You're more than welcome, Celine, and I'm sure Kirsty wants to say something as well, but I'd just like to say thank you for another fabulous session. I was actually messaging Celine directly because I attended her session just before Christmas, and I have made some major changes around. I was already drinking lots of water and doing exercise, but now I'm the fruit and vegetable queen, and I feel much better for it. So,
Yeah.
So yes, so thank you. So
I'm
I'm sure everybody has enjoyed the session, but yeah, I as I said, I have heard her speak before, but I still, despite being really busy, refused to miss the session. So I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have, and thank you, Celine, for a fantastic session. So Kirsty, did you want to add anything? I've kind of kiboshed your session.
I don't really have anything to add other than thank you. That was fantastic, and I'm quite excited to start making some of these changes.
Wonderful. And now as a collective, you have common language around the Wellculator, and we can help each other, because if this was easy, we would all be doing it. Even I need to be reminded. So really well done for being here and being engaged and putting yourself first. Yeah, if we can all be more effervescent, we can uplift ourselves and those around us. I look forward to seeing you in a month's time for a check-in.
Brilliant. Thank you. And have a fantastic weekend, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.